Like this video to support. Join our YouTube family now and never miss out on epic content, entertainment, and surprises. Hit that subscribe button. Let's start. Spoiler alert.
1964, Alabama. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is practicing his speech in front of the mirror. He stops to summon his wife Coretta Scott to comment on his tie. Believing it makes him appear unworthy in front of individuals he is about to honor. Coretta adjusts her husband's tie and assures him he looks wonderful. The couple subsequently attends a ceremony where King collects the Nobel Peace Prize and delivers his speech. 4 little girls stroll down the steps of the 16th Street Baptist Church. They are discussing how they do their hair when an explosion occurs, killing all of the girls. Annie Lee Cooper completes a paperwork to become a registered voter. The white registrar asks her how many county judges Alabama has. She claims there are 67, but the registrar requires her to list them all. When she cannot, he rejects her application. King meets with President Lyndon B. Johnson and his advisor Lee C. White to discuss the issue of black individuals being unable to register to vote. King agrees that whites are illegally withholding the black community's registration papers, while also highlighting the senseless acts of violence against them, such as the church bombing. King and his group are seeking federal legislation that would allow black citizens to register to vote without restriction. Johnson, on the other hand, is more concerned with ending the country's poverty. King flies to Selma, Alabama, alongside Ralph Abernathy, Andrew Young, James Orange, and Diane Nash. They meet with Reverend James Bevel and other civil rights leaders from the SCLC, including Hosea Williams and Amelia Boynton, at a hotel. While King is signed in, a young white man approaches him and socks him in the mouth. Johnson speaks with J. Edgar Hoover about the incident. Hoover believes King is becoming a problem, and he advises creating friction at home to weaken the relationship, knowing there is tension between King and his wife. King goes home. Coretta expresses doubts about her husband's conduct and concern for her family's well-being. At night, King asks Mahalia Jackson to assist him in reaching out and hearing the Lord's voice. King addresses a crowd of other civil rights activists and optimistic voters, rousing their spirits and assuring them that their oppressors will not prevent them from achieving their goals. Their objective is to march from Selma to Montgomery, and their efforts will be non-violent, despite the fact that the government will not hesitate to use violence against them. King and his comrades march through Selma in front of a large gathering of white people and the harsh sheriff Jim Clark. The marchers kneel and place their hands on the back of their heads. One father refuses to kneel as his wife and son assist him. Clark and his companions approach them and attempt to force the man down. When his son defends his father, Clark nearly strikes him with his club, but Annie hits Clark and knocks him down. In revenge, Clark and his goons knock Annie to the ground. King and many of his followers are later caught and imprisoned. Governor George Wallace speaks out against King's campaign and vows not to allow the marches to continue through Alabama. Johnson, meanwhile, is furious when he learns about the incident after the march. Coretta seeks reassurance from Amelia before meeting with Malcolm X. He disagrees with King's nonviolent efforts and promises to be an alternative voice in the black community. Coretta informs her husband of this, which irritates King because Malcolm X had referred to him as a modern-day Uncle Tom. Wallace meets with Colonel Al Lingo to discuss the status of the marches. Wallace understands he doesn't want to face Clark. Lingo informs him of a planned night march and decides to utilize dominance to block their advance. Thus, Wallace permits the state troopers to attack the protesters as they go about their night march. They physically abuse demonstrators in the streets, bashing or shoving them into walls. During a fight in a restaurant, an unarmed young man named Jimmy Lee Jackson is shot by a state trooper. He died in his mother's arms. After being freed from prison, King visits with Jimmy's parents and expresses his sorrow. He gives another speech to his followers, addressing the assassination of JFK and the murder of Malcolm X the day before, stating that the people will continue to fight for their freedom and rights, and that people like Jimmy who are gunned down senselessly are murdered not only by violent white men in power, but also by those who stand by and refuse to fight alongside those in need. He vows to continue the march through Washington. The Kings begin to receive threats at home from people who claim they will harm their children. Furthermore, King's collaborators, especially members of the SNCC, question whether he is doing enough to support the cause. The demonstrators move down Selma in front of a swarm of armed troopers. They order the marchers to turn back before storming at them and using more aggressive tactics, such as throwing tear gas and striking them with billy clubs. This tragedy, known as Bloody Sunday, is broadcast to the entire country and witnessed by individuals such as Johnson and Wallace. This is brought to the attention of attorney Fred Gray, who then consults with Judge Frank Minnis Johnson about overturning a decree that would prohibit the march. Judge Johnson declines because he does not want to oppose Wallace. President Johnson is fed up with the situation and orders both King and Wallace to stop their actions. He sends John Dorr to meet with King and postpone the march. King tells him he should persuade Wallace and Clark to be non-violent. A number of white residents, including Viola Liuzzo and many priests, go to Selma to join the marchers for their upcoming march. The people continue their march, only to be met again by the troopers. Only this time, there is no violence. The marchers kneel down gravely. King is once again targeted by his collaborators, who believe they only got away with it because they were standing alongside white citizens, and so immune to violent vengeance. Furthermore, 2 racist white males brutally assault and murder 2 white sympathizers for following the marchers one night. Eventually, King and his collaborators are brought to trial. Coretta is there to assist her spouse. Judge Johnson rules in favor of King and the marchers, permitting the march to proceed place. President Johnson and Governor Wallace meet, and Johnson confronts him about the entire ordeal. Johnson later holds a press conference in which he announces that he will send a bill to Congress to remove voting restrictions for the black population. This is greeted with applause all around. Johnson also praised the activists who participated in the marches for their courage. The activists have gathered for the final march to Montgomery. This is paired with actual footage from real-life marches. King delivers one final speech emphasizing the equality of black and white individuals. As he starts his statement, we see some text about the film's real-life equivalents. Andrew Young was appointed UN ambassador by President Carter after spending 3 terms in Congress. He was then elected mayor of Atlanta for 2 terms. George Wallace ran unsuccessfully for president 4 times, before being crippled by an assassination attempt in 1972. Sheriff Jim Clark was ousted by an overwhelming black vote, and never became sheriff again. Viola Liuzzo was killed by a Klansman hours after the march, while attempting to accompany demonstrators back to Selma. Coretta Scott King founded the King Center, and successfully advocated for a holiday in her husband's honor. She never got remarried. 5 months later, Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965 beside Martin Luther King Jr. King went on to lead the American Civil Rights Movement for 13 years, using nonviolence until his assassination in 1968. He was 39 years old. King closes his address by stating that freedom is becoming more accessible because to the Lord's grace.
Please make sure that you like, follow, and subscribe to our channel. Check out the other videos if you watched this video all the way through. Cheers.